The story begins with a voice stating that heaven and earth are kind to all things and beings, so they should be observed, creating a perfect world for cultivation. Since the birth of the world, during the era of chaos, a great figure named Tao always existed, overseeing the laws of heaven and earth. Below, the world experienced two major cycles. In the first cycle, thousands of people trained and cultivated with the aim of reaching the celestial realm. However, the beings of the world grew greedy, stealing the spiritual roots of heaven and earth and trying to seize the celestial source of power. This greed weakened Tao, leaving him disappointed in life's beings, leading him to destroy them all. This marked the beginning of the second cycle. The three realms, heaven, human, and earth, were divided, no longer as before. The west was ruled by the gods, and the east by the immortals. The earthly realm became a desolate place, with towering piles of bones. The human realm existed between the mighty heavenly realm and the earthly realm, where the weak fell during reincarnation. But not all beings from the first cycle were wiped out by the destruction. Some reincarnated as humans, others came back to life, and some returned with their powers intact, all with the shared purpose of embarking on their destined paths to challenge the celestial Tao. This angered Tao One, who struck the earth with thunder, resulting in the world's destruction for the second time. Now in its third cycle, many years had passed. Upon hearing the story, a young man said he had no interest in it. He declared that the former celestial Tao was gone, and now, he was the new celestial Tao. The boy began walking somewhere, remarking that the world was already giving him too much importance after his brief arrival. The spirit accompanying him agreed, stating that he, as the celestial Tao, held unlimited power over the world. The scene shifted to an old man walking on a mountain. He seemed surprised by something ahead and noticed a boy speaking to a spirit. The boy said that strength alone didn't solve everything, it was only useful to defeat enemies. His brother Sun had once told him that the strong use their power against others who are stronger, while the weak use strength to fight the weak. However, he was not the previous celestial Tao and would not repeat that same mistake. The old man wondered if the boy was talking to himself, as he couldn't see the spirit. Just then, a strange noise startled him, and he turned to see a giant dragon charging toward them. The dragon, with its terrifying teeth, was about to strike. The boy remained still, seemingly recalling some rules to become the true celestial Tao. As the dragon lunged, the boy flicked some wax out of his ear and shot it at the creature. It missed, hitting the mountain behind the dragon. With a threatening look, the boy stared at the monster, which began to tremble in fear. The monster then turned and fled. The boy remarked that it couldn't withstand 3 of his attacks. The spirit asked why he did that, and the boy replied that he merely wanted to scare it and wasn't trying to hurt it. The spirit questioned if the boy wasn't planning to use force against his enemies. The boy responded that as long as negotiation was possible, he didn't want the world to be destroyed for a third time. Besides, he had only just arrived and didn't know much about the world or the situation. The boy then looked around, saying that his first stop would be somewhere nearby. The scene shifted to the gates of the City of Freedom, where people walked about. A carriage appeared, heading to a destination, carrying slaves inside. One man spoke about the successful hunt, expecting a good reward for the women captured, noting that fairies were always sought after by the nobles in the city. Just then, the protagonist appeared and was asked by the man if he was interested in the slaves. The boy remained silent, and the man continued, offering a deal. The women were recently captured, some were prisoners of war, others were innocent villagers. The boy remained quiet as he examined the women. He then activated some ability with his eyes and assumed they all had empty hearts. The man continued his pitch, saying that if the women didn't interest the boy, he had something rare to offer. He revealed a beautiful girl in a cell, claiming she was of the elven race from the western continent and could be bought for 1,000 gold coins. The boy stayed silent before turning to leave. Irritated, the man assumed the boy was just a wanderer. As the boy walked away, he wondered if this was human trafficking, something worse than in a feudal society. The spirit appeared and asked why the boy didn't free them. The boy replied that freeing them wouldn't solve anything, as the slave traders would only keep capturing more people. This wasn't a simple problem to fix. There were over 100 slaves in the shop, with branches across all continents. The spirit reminded the boy that as the celestial Tao, he could free all the slaves in the world with his will. The boy responded that another market would arise to replace this one, and the cycle of hunters would continue. Unlike his predecessor, he knew the problem required more than just a simple solution. The man welcomed the protagonist and showed him the available slaves, claiming they were well trained and wouldn't attempt to escape. If any tried to desert, the boy would be able to pay 10 times their value. The boy asked if letting them escape would still be considered fleeing. The man replied that if the boy bought them, they wouldn't leave his side, even if told to. The young man asked if he could ask the woman some questions. The boy was told that he could, and if he wasn't satisfied, he could go to the VIP room to see others for sale. The woman, in the meantime, was carefully observing the boy. The protagonist asked her if she desired freedom, to which she simply nodded. He then asked if she loved anyone, but she remained silent. He finally asked if she wanted to remain a slave or become free. Reluctantly, she answered that she wished only to be her master's slave. Hearing this, the boy gave up on the idea of freeing her and asked the man to take him to the VIP room. Some time later, the man served tea to the boy, telling him to enjoy it while he fetched his exclusive products. The boy then activated his system, asking for the abolition of slavery to be his first task as the Celestial Da. A system appeared, and a voice asked the boy to describe the rule he wished to add. The boy pondered, saying that any action committed against any human or humanoid creature for trafficking purposes would trigger the rule. Human traffickers would see a dark figure with strength far beyond theirs, and before confronting them, they would be warned. The spirit voiced doubts, questioning why the rule was ranked below the 5th position. The boy responded that if immortals engaged in human trafficking, they should be ashamed of themselves. The boy then added more details to the rule, ensuring that once the first warning failed, the trafficker would be attacked until the trafficking stopped. The system notified the boy that the rule was being prepared and asked for a definition of human trafficking. The boy answered that it should cover all forms of trafficking, excluding voluntary slavery. The system confirmed that the rule had been established and asked if it should be implemented. The boy clicked yes, and a light appeared. The scene shifts to the man bringing in some slaves, and within moments, something unusual happens. The system announces that the rule is now active. Shortly after, someone opens the door, and the man appears, presenting the 10 best slaves he has selected for the protagonist. He claims that these slaves are of high value. Just then, a terrifying figure appears behind him, and seeing the monster, the man becomes desperate, falling to the ground in fear, asking if the protagonist sees it too. The protagonist responds affirmatively, asking if this is how the trading house welcomes guests. The man insists it's not supposed to be like that. The boy then says he's already beginning from this place. The other man warns that getting close to the creature is dangerous, but the young man replies that if he wasn't here, the only danger would be himself. Just then, someone is thrown out of the wall, and the protagonist catches him. The man is badly injured, and the protagonist addresses him as captain. The injured man explains he's a second-order warrior and one of the security captains of the trading house. Observing the creature, he wonders what it is, noting that it looks like him but is far stronger. The creature steps into the room, revealing it has the same appearance as the other man. The man asks the boy if he has encountered such a creature, suggesting it's best for the protagonist to leave as he can't guarantee his safety. The boy assures him not to worry, claiming there's no one in this world who could kill him. Annoyed, the man insists the boy leave on his own. The monster prepares its attack, and the two charge at each other, exchanging blows. The resulting attacks hit the slaves with projectiles, but the protagonist intervenes. The other man is struck by the creature, severely injured, and the monster moves quickly toward him. The man pleads for mercy, but the creature ignores him, walking past him toward the slaves. It raises its sword and begins breaking the slaves' chains, freeing them all. The man is stunned and wonders what's happening. The protagonist realizes the shadows aren't there to kill, but to free the slaves. The man tries to stop them, ordering the monsters to prevent the slaves from escaping, but it's too late, his slaves are already leaving. A creature resembling the man appears behind him and shoves him to the ground. The girl watches silently, and then flees. The man is distraught, watching his money slip away. A figure appears behind him, and the woman notices it. It's revealed the protagonist is beneath her, asking the girl to return home. With tears in her eyes, the woman agrees and leaves. The protagonist comments that everything happened very quickly. An unknown figure kneels, and the woman says she has found her master. The scene cuts to a tea house in the city. The protagonist is still drinking and asks if he hadn't told her not to follow him. The girl introduces herself as Kin, saying she's sworn to follow him and asking if she can be his servant and travel with him. The protagonist rejects her request. Devastated, she begs him not to abandon her and asks if she's done something wrong, offering to change to satisfy him. The boy tells her to stand, explaining he's not abandoning her but that she's too attached, with a volatile personality and unstable temperament, capable of destroying a whole country when annoyed, making her a big problem. Kin insists she just wants to stay by Dao's side. The boy says he feels uncomfortable around her, asking if she still wants to stay, claiming that she's only interested in his body, and if allowed to stay, she might sneak into his room at night. The spirit appears, saying that the girl wouldn't dare do that, likely just wanting to snuggle up to him. Dao agrees she can follow him, but she must remain quiet and not draw attention. Qin thinks her master doesn't want her kneeling, and that he cares for her. The boy, however, expresses his wish to abolish slavery, but now finds himself with a slave in front of him. He recalls the 5 celestial incarnations of the former celestial Dao and wonders what the other incarnations like her are. The spirit informs him that 3 of the 5 are women, and 2 are men, all completely loyal to him. Embarrassed, the protagonist says they're all troublesome. The boy calls Qin, and she immediately responds, asking what she thinks of those who oppose the celestial Dao. Qin responds that they are insolent and ambitious, and during both the first and second cycles, they killed themselves with their ambitions. Gods died, demons perished, and only the heavens were eternal. She affirms that the protagonist is her master, the eternal ruler of the 3 worlds. The protagonist replies that this isn't necessarily true, because despite being invincible in one-on-one battles, the celestial Dao would struggle in a group battle. He stands, saying time is against them, and they still have much to do. The scene shifts to another part of the city, where the boy summons the system again, thinking that adding the rules was easy and his plan has worked. As they walk down the street, Qin asks why he decided to use the Black Shadow to abolish slavery when he could easily provide unlimited wealth and eliminate social pressure and hierarchy. Slapping her on the head, the protagonist asks if she's stupid, saying that doing so would make everyone reject humanity and return to an era of savagery. The celestial Dao's purpose is to maintain order, and what he's doing now is simply correcting the situation without interrupting the natural cycle of society. His work is about opening the path for people, guiding them in a world where light exists, but darkness is equally undesirable. Qin responds that she understands, and the protagonist notices something as a man hands some coins to another person. The protagonist warns that this is truly a lesson, asking the girl not to ruin everything and telling her to stay hidden. Meanwhile, the girl helps a beggar, and another rogue tries to steal her purse. The protagonist intervenes, alerting her that her wallet is about to be stolen. The girl notices just in time, and with one swift kick, sends the man flying. Afterward, she turns to Dao and thanks him for his help, introducing herself and asking if he could offer her a job. Dao tells her to call him Dao, and she thanks him again, saying she'd be in serious trouble without his intervention. Dao mentions it was a minor issue and advises her to keep a closer eye on her belongings. As he prepares to leave, the girl says she still has work to do, bidding him farewell. Realizing she's an adventurer, Dao asks if she might take on a task for him. Thinking it's best to learn more about the world, Dao considers that an adventurer might be the right person for the job. He also notes that while the loyal girl is good, she might agree to whatever he asks. Dao hands her a pouch of coins, saying he's headed west and finds it boring, so he wants to find people to talk to. The girl becomes happy, calling him generous, and asks if they can chat a little. Dao tells her to stay hidden and not speak until he allows her out. Later, the scene shifts, and the girl apologizes for the delay in preparing the carriage, explaining it's a smaller one to avoid attracting attention. She introduces Dao to her colleagues, and they begin their journey. Dao greets them, and they set off. During their journey, the girl talks to Dao, asking if Miss Mary is a nun from the Church of Light. Dao confirms, but internally, he's critical of the God of Light, believing that the second cycle of the God of Light only reached the peak of the celestial ranking and couldn't compete with the celestial powers. The girl appears uncomfortable as Dao continues, but Dao apologizes, thinking about the God of Light from the first cycle, who was killed by Qin. The spirit comments that Qin would likely claim to have forgotten everything and that she was responsible for eliminating the first cycle's celestial rankings. The conversation shifts, and the man notes that nowadays, few people will pay just for conversation. He asks Dao if he doesn't have any guards. Dao answers that his guards wouldn't be as strong as he is. Swami appears, noting that Dao is strong enough not to need guards to leave the City of Freedom. The man agrees, mentioning that Dao's aura is so contained it's barely perceptible. Meanwhile, in the underworld, a girl feels her master's aura and learns that it's the nightmare of slave traders. Many have died at the hands of that figure. Back in the present, Dao realizes he's been careless in letting his aura be sensed. The girl questions the group of people passing by, wondering if they're refugees. Dao believes they are slaves freed by the dark figure from the City of Freedom. The girl asks why they left, considering the danger. The other woman suggests that the slave traders no longer had any refuge after the dark figure appeared. The man calls it the nightmare of slave traders. The other girl adds that despite the church's teachings prohibiting slavery, the dark figure's actions are radical. Irritated, the woman says she's long wanted to punch those traders. Dao then asks whether they think the dark figure's actions are right or wrong. The two girls remain silent, but the man responds that the figure's actions are justified. As compared to prolonged suffering, sacrifices are temporary but bring hope for the future. The other girl acknowledges their actions but regrets that the dark figure didn't save those still enslaved, wishing for the goddess of light to help them. Dao asks what good the prayer will do. The girl is confused, and Dao continues, saying the goddess of light can't save them. The girl defends the goddess, stating that she's benevolent and will one day end the world's suffering. Dao replies that she cannot, revealing that even the goddess of light couldn't save herself. The other man considers this an exaggeration. Dao asks if he believes in divine salvation, to which the man replies that it's better to learn spells to protect oneself. Dao agrees, stating it's better to save yourself than wait for divine intervention. The nun mentions some remote countries on the original continent use live sacrifices to create rain. Dao asks if that's true, and the girl explains that the process involves using a third-degree ice talisman to summon rain. The others laugh, doubting the explanation. Qin grows irritated and tries to speak up, but Dao asks her to wait. Later, Dao notices her silence and realizes something is different. As he opens the system screen, he decides what to do. The scene shifts to nighttime, where the group is camping. A young man is performing magic to light the campfire, warning that it's dangerous to travel at night and that they should stay there. Dao observes the system screen, noting 3 third-degree magical beasts nearby. Qin then mentions a group of undead to the southwest. Dao tells her to do nothing and just stay still, preparing for sleep. Qin remains silent, wishing her master good night. Dao throws a piece of wood at her, with a warning written on it, attacks are forbidden, and she does so at her own risk. Meanwhile, the man and the girl outside discuss returning to her parents and telling them she's pregnant. Dao wonders if they don't know how to be discreet. He suddenly senses something, urging everyone to get up. Something strange is outside, and Dao spots a strange light, followed by a skull. An entire army of undead emerges. Dao is taken aback by the number of dead, and the spirit comments that everything is broken. Dao demands an explanation, and the spirit says that reincarnation was destroyed by a reverent first-ranked power at the end of the first great cycle. Dao wonders why they didn't pierce the heavens, and the spirit explains that they did, causing chaotic energy to pour onto the main continent, causing many casualties. Dao understands that strength doesn't solve all problems, as it would only eliminate his enemies. Another monster then appears, saying it has finally found a human. The girl is surprised to hear it speak. The nun apologizes to Dao, saying they could all be killed by the monsters and undead soldiers. The man comments that unless Dao is stronger than him, they might all die. The nun prays to her goddess for help. Dao expresses his dislike of people praying near him, stating that the monsters possess intelligence and asking if they really wish to fight him. The monster senses the protagonist's aura and orders its army to move toward him. Ken steps in, suggesting they should eliminate all the monsters, but unexpectedly, one of the monsters kills its own soldiers. It declares that the strong should not be attacked. Day is surprised that such a dragon-like being can recognize hierarchy and immediately kills the undead beneath it after recognizing a threat capable of destroying its entire group. The monster agrees but insists that the weak must be eliminated first. It commands its soldiers to advance on the other group. Day observes this and comments that he hired the soldiers for conversation, so the monster has no right to harm them before their mission is complete. He then stomps the ground, causing a massive crack that swallows several monsters, easily defeating them. The general is impressed by the overwhelming strength, and the group realizes how powerful the protagonist truly is. The spirit questions Da's decision to use force despite earlier claims not to. Da responds that while strength solves problems, it is sometimes necessary when dealing with enemies. Noticing the skeletons gathering, Da asks them to stop hiding and questions their leader. A girl named Eimer, a member of the Church of Necromancers, steps forward and apologizes for the disturbance. Day is impressed by her politeness, telling her he is not unreasonable and that this is a no-man's land where people can come and go freely. He suggests she be more cautious in the future since not everyone is as tolerant as he is. Eimer thanks him and commands the monsters to clear the way. Later, as the group walks, one man comments on the unusual sight of an undead knight kneeling before Da, wondering how powerful he really is. The nun remains silent, clearly disturbed by the situation. She argues that Da cannot simply leave the undead alone, as they could kill more people. Da asks her opinion on what he should do. The nun suggests that, as the hero and strongest among them, Da should eliminate the undead, as he is the savior who has already helped them. Da slaps his hand, questioning if she thinks he should kill the undead simply because he is the strongest. He asks if she is truly a devotee of the goddess of light, pointing out that in her eyes, undead are just creatures who hate sunlight, not inherently evil. He questions if she feels no guilt for destroying those who believe differently. At this moment, another girl asks if Da knows the primordial goddess of light. Da responds skeptically, doubting he would know her, believing the primordial goddess lacks the necessary qualifications to ascend the ancient road to the heavens. The group thanks Da for saving them, offering him a pouch of money. Da declines, saying that money holds no value for him. He appreciates the conversation, which gave him a new perspective. He starts interacting with the system screen again before preparing to leave. He tells them he has other matters to attend to and they must part ways. He reminds them that gods are real, but to him, they are simply stronger individuals who have transcended normal limits. Anyone striving to reach that level could become a god in the eyes of the world. He says he hopes to meet them again before disappearing. The nun, seeing this, wonders if Da might be a god. She comments that he seems to be above the goddess of light. The scene shifts to Da and Kin, who are observing everything from above. Kin asks why Da decided to save the undead, still confused by his actions. Da replies that to undo chaos and restore the celestial path, mortals are the most important contributors, and putting people first is the key. Kin asks where they are headed next. Soon, Da begins casting a spell, declaring they are going directly to the underworld. The scene transitions to the underworld, where undead surround the area. A black portal opens, and 2 blue meteors crash to the ground, revealing Da. He comments that this is truly a unique place in the underworld. A spirit explains that this is one of the 3 great realms, the place of death and reincarnation. Da questions if that's true because all he sees is ruin and a few undead. Kin expresses her disgust, saying the presence of such filth pollutes her master's eyes, and she intends to eliminate them. Da asks her to wait, explaining that these are mindless creatures with no reason to bother him. The system, curious, asks why Da holds no prejudice against the undead. Da responds that their existence follows the celestial path, and they should not be considered different from other races. The only difference is that the cycle of reincarnation is broken, leaving them as wandering corpses without intelligence. Kin asks what their next move will be. Da reveals they are here to rebuild the cycle of reincarnation. The spirit warns them that while they can restore the cycle, it will require a lot of Da's power. Da asks how weakened he will become, and the spirit says he could probably withstand 1 hit from a high-level celestial, but a second could injure him. He cannot afford to be disturbed during the process. Da becomes pensive but then looks at his servant, seemingly having an idea. He takes her hand, asking her to lend him her power so they can restore the cycle of reincarnation together. A barrier forms around them as the cycle begins. Light envelopes the black sphere below, and the undead watch in silence. A skeletal hand emerges from among the monsters, confused. It wonders where its head is, finds it, and returns to normal form, but is puzzled because it isn't time for reincarnation. Looking up, it sees the light and recognizes it as belonging to the celestial Da, likely repairing the cycle of reincarnation. The monster recalls a past battle with Yen from the ancient savage city over the power of reincarnation, during which they each obtained half of the underworld's power. Since then, the first and second great cycles have remained broken. The monster wonders why the current cycle seeks to restore reincarnation, especially with the appearance of the celestial Da, whose form used to be both masculine and feminine. It contemplates what Da might be plotting. Despite its suspicions, the monster decides not to act rashly, thinking that revealing its weakness is impolite. As the undead begin to regain their consciousness, one of them speaks, asking who is responsible. At that moment, the undead start to stir. The monster realizes that acting too hastily could lead to its destruction but decides to wait and form a new plan. Rebuilding the cycle of reincarnation does not benefit only the undead, and it must forget its previous thoughts. It decides to wait and see how things unfold, with the Empress showing mercy this time. Meanwhile, in the underworld, the scene shifts to a group of monsters advancing toward the protagonist. Kin remarks that it looks like some flies are approaching. Da tells her not to get distracted, as he still has his plans. With a snap of his fingers, Da appears among the monsters, but it's only a clone of him. Kin asks why he created the clone. Da responds that he has his reasons, knowing that if he left the defense to Kin alone, the underworld would likely be destroyed. Da's clone confronts the monsters, warning them that they will be killed if they come any closer. Some monsters ignore the warning and charge directly at the clone. The clone easily dodges all the attacks, when suddenly, H appears behind it and begins casting a spell. The spell is launched at Da's clone. The gravitational spell has no effect, and another monster charges at the protagonist. Instead, the spell targets the original body. Kin warns that someone is attacking from behind, but Dao tells her not to be distracted, as they should not underestimate his clone. In an instant, the clone appears behind the monster, grabs its head, and slams it into the ground, defeating it quickly. The clone then says it will play with the others for a while longer, so they shouldn't go too far. One of the monsters suggests attacking all at once, as the protagonist is alone, and the monsters charge. However, their attack is ineffective due to the immense difference in strength, and Dao orders them to kneel. All the monsters fall to the ground in anger. One monster remarks that it cannot move, though others are still not fully under his control. Despite this, they are amazed that the clone's mere aura suppresses several powerful specialists. Meanwhile, one of the monsters seems to laugh, saying it has been a long time since someone interesting came to the underworld and wants to see how strong the clone really is. Another monster, shocked, identifies the presence of Wangi, once the most powerful dragon rider of the East in the First Era. After his death, he became a skeletal knight. Soon, another monster declares that the celestial treasure will be theirs and anyone who interferes must die. The clone responds that the monster won't get what it wants. The monster then launches a series of attacks, striking the monsters around it. It tries to strike the clone, but it's overconfident. The clone punches the monster in the face, and an explosion follows. The monster is easily defeated. The watching monsters are astounded by the clone's power, wondering if it was too much. The clone then turns its gaze toward the others, and the system provides information about each monster. The clone is surprised that some monsters have not yet fled. Teleporting behind them, he asks if they truly want to fight him. One monster responds that it would not dare to, only wishing to know the purpose of his visit to the underworld. The clone says there's no need for questions because they will soon learn the reason. At that moment, a light shines behind them. The sphere where Dao stands emits a very bright light. One of the monsters remarks that it is not creating a new law but instead is the law of life and death itself, the reconstruction of the cycle of reincarnation. The monster realizes that such immense power can only come from someone extremely strong. The clone, in turn, asks them not to guess because they will soon know the truth. In a matter of seconds, the undead begin to regain their human forms. Flesh and bones reappear on each of them, and the strange aura dissipates. Reincarnation is complete, and the underworld should now function as it was meant to. Meanwhile, a girl laughs, declaring that the boy is truly the celestial Dao, as he restored the souls of all the beings in the underworld with ease. For this, she feels the need to thank him. She is the Ghost Empress, and as a result of Dao's actions, her body has been restored. The now human undead rejoice in the change. Another woman watches, noticing that the souls of the undead are being restored. Normally, when a soul disperses, even the strongest specialists cannot restore it. A monster then says that it is possible, but only if the being is the celestial Dao. At that moment, the protagonist's clone disappears, and Dao and Qin appear. The monsters are stunned and ask if Dao is truly the celestial Dao. Qin, irritated, asks if they are really questioning her master's identity. Dao asks her to remain calm and confirms that he is indeed the celestial Dao. However, the monsters still seem hesitant to believe it. One monster mentions remembering the catastrophe of the Second Great Cycle, saying it never wants to feel that despair again. Approaching the monster, Dao asks a question. He explains that he noticed many powerful specialists avoided the two great battles and asks if the monster can explain why. The monster replies that it was due to the inner world. As long as there were sufficient resources there, they could survive using their animalistic power. Dao thinks they are relying on the world's limited resources to resist, so he asks if they have the power to unite and resist the celestial Dao's might. The monster responds that doing so would only leave even fewer survivors. The monster then asks if it may pose a question. It inquires why Dao caused the catastrophe, suggesting that if he said he was forced to become the celestial Dao, they might believe him. However, the spirit replies that they would not understand that the celestial Dao could be replaced. With no other choice, Dao thinks he should take the blame. He explains that those in his realm are already ultimate beings and would inevitably exchange the reconstruction of the law. However, the power of the law is not something anyone can sustain, and no one wants to see others wield it, leading to conflict. The opportunities the celestial Dao offers are shared among all beings, but eventually, only a few specialists control them. Therefore, the underworld cycle of reincarnation serves as an example. Due to the conflict in the ancient savage city, the ghost emperor of the Second Great Cycle was split and taken, causing reincarnation to cease. Since then, the underworld has been in a tragic state. Dao continues, explaining that destroying the world will allow more people to survive. Without it, the world would have been destroyed long ago by the greed of the specialists. The other monster says that in the past, they were too focused on increasing their power and neglected everything else. Dao replies that even the strongest can make mistakes, and the important thing is how to make amends. For this reason, he offers them an opportunity, asking if they are willing to join his organization. Qin comments that these beings are too weak to stand alongside him, but Dao responds that the combined effort of all beings is necessary to maintain the celestial Dao's order. Though they are weak compared to others, they are still at the peak within the three realms, so he says that the cycle of reincarnation is still incomplete. The cycle has a natural mechanism to absorb souls, but for those above the level of the celestial Tao, the cycle has little power. In such cases, beings like them are needed to force souls to reincarnate, so he names this profession ghost hunters. He adds that the organization will be called Hades and asks if they are willing to join. Kin watches threateningly, and all the monsters agree to join. Another monster offers to serve but with conditions. Kin asks angrily how a mere creature could make demands. Tao calms her and explains that mutual benefits can be long-lasting. The monster reveals a strange mark on its body, saying the wound was inflicted by the primordial demon wolf and requires sap from the tree of life to heal. Tao acknowledges he needs to visit that place in the future and agrees to help. Things are progressing well, but Tao mentions that his organization still needs a manager. Kin, hearing this, suggests Ing as the best candidate to manage. Tao begins pulling up data on the woman and asks if she can be revived. The spirit confirms, and Tao asks to bring her immediately. The scene shifts to Tao and Kin traveling to a location. Kin then asks why Tao made a trip to the forest when he could easily heal the monster's wounds. Tao explains that she wouldn't understand, as it's like collecting quests from an NPC. Confused, Kin listens as they arrive at their destination. Tao observes the area in silence. In front of him stands a chained girl, the one he was seeking. Lifting her chin, he comments that her body is still intact. Despite being sealed there after death, her aura is weaker than Kin's. The spirit adds that among the 5 celestial incarnations, Kin's strength is the weakest. The protagonist answers that it's fine and they should proceed to revive Ing quickly. At that moment, a system screen appears before the boy, asking if he is sure about reviving her. The boy then asks if this means that if the girl dies again, her power would be lost permanently. If that's the case, he needs to be more careful. He decides to give her 1% of his power. He then pulls a blue sphere from his body, resulting in an immense burst of light that envelopes the area. Meanwhile, the group of monsters is still waiting for the protagonist. The burst is so powerful that it reaches all of them. He even gets close to the woman from earlier. Surprised, she wonders what the celestial Tao is doing, assuming he realized the girl wasn't dead. At that moment, Tao grabs the microorganism again, remarking that he forgot to control this aura when releasing his power. He didn't expect that just 1% of his power would be so terrifying. Shortly after, he approaches the girl again and transfers that 1% of his power into her body. A light begins to envelop the area. At that moment, the girl opens her eyes. She immediately grabs the protagonist, stating that she's finally reunited with him. With tears in her eyes, she says he is now her master. Intervening, Kin tells her not to be so close to speak. Tao observes the girl as she kneels, thanking him for his kindness, saying she will not disappoint him this time. Tao then says he has a mission for her. He tells her that from this day on, she will be the chief manager of his agency. Therefore, she has only one task, to contribute to and maintain the security of the cycle of reincarnation. The spirit comments that this seems like 2 tasks, and the protagonist asks if there's a problem with that. Observing, Kin thinks Ying's personality is very different from hers, but that's a good thing because she would go mad if Ying acted the same way as Kin. Shortly after, the girl asks if the protagonist won't stay in the underworld. Kin replies that their master still has other matters to handle, so she should take care of the underworld on her own. The protagonist says that since she is one of his celestial incarnations, she should have more confidence in her responsibilities. Moreover, he has already reconstructed the cycle of reincarnation. Now she only needs to become the king of Hades. The girl replies that she understands, then begins to shout, calling all forms of life to listen to her. She declares that she is the celestial incarnation of Ing, and in the future, she will be the head of the organization helping the protagonist manage the underworld. Those who need to be craftsmen will help with design, while the greater undead will oversee construction. The powerful undead will enter the human realm as spirits to guide the souls. Therefore, if anyone fails in their duty, they will certainly be killed. Furthermore, they will become enemies of the celestial Tao. The protagonist observes the girl, noting that she is truly frightening. The spirit says the girl was the leader of the Umming clan when she was alive, so it seems that leaving the underworld in her hands will be without problem. Shin then asks where they are heading next. The boy responds that they are going to the elven forest. Shortly after, a scene cuts to that forest. A group of people seems to be there, mentioning that the elves they captured this time are truly of high quality. Meanwhile, an unknown girl is inside a cell, apparently remaining silent. One of the men tells the other not to be careless because until they leave the forest, they should remain alert. The other man says their leader is very brave and asks who would dare block their path. but at that moment, a dark figure appears around them. The man, irritated, asks how they dare to do such a thing. At that moment, the spirit points its finger at them, pointing directly at the cell where the elf is being held. The man, irritated, asks if they are trying to steal his loot. At that moment, the spirit grabs its weapon. The men start laughing at the spirit because it wields a spear. At that moment, it begins to form a magic circle and summons a dragon above it, leaving the man very surprised by what he sees. Meanwhile, the elves are observing the situation, hoping they will indeed be rescued. However, another elf in the background thinks that's not true because if it were the great elven god, the exclusive elven angel of the great god would be present, but this figure is dark. The other man says he doesn't care about their origins. If they want slaves, they can give them a few. However, the spirit responds that it doesn't want just a few. It points out that it wants all the slaves. This makes the man furious. He then orders his group to charge at the creature. At that moment, the dragon breathes fire, incinerating part of the man's soldiers, then charges again at his army, easily taking them all down. The leader, observing this, is stunned. He begs the monster not to come closer. In seconds, the clone releases the cage, successfully freeing all the elves. One of the girls, in turn, thanks him. At that moment, the other man appears above the clone, but even that is not enough. In seconds, he is killed. The remaining soldiers see this and start to flee, but it is already too late because the group of elves has already arrived to help. Another elf tells the girl to observe, saying that is the divine dragon knight who has saved their kin. Shortly after, another elf says he plans to sell all the humans to the north. The spirit misses this. At that moment, it transforms into a clone of that elf, successfully shooting an arrow into his skull. As a result, the elf is easily defeated. Another elf, seeing this, calls for everyone to prepare. However, another elf intervenes, asking them not to fight. She states that the man has done nothing wrong because she can sense that he treats all forms of life fairly. The other elf asks what she means by that. At that moment, the spirit begins to release the elves' bindings. They thank the man for his kindness. The elf says that since the appearance of the spirit is adhered to a single rule, this rule is to attack only those who traffic other beings, regardless of whether they are beasts or warriors. So, as long as they do not engage in the slave trade, the spirit will not attack them. Shortly after, the elf makes an announcement, stating that no one is allowed to take prisoners. In seconds, the spirit disappears, and the other elf thanks it for its help. The scene then cuts to the protagonist sneezing. He says he's fine, just felt a tickle in his nose. Meanwhile, he observes everything happening below. Kin, in turn, mentions that something is going on down there. The protagonist responds that it's simply the cycle he created earlier. Shortly after, a fireball begins to appear behind the boy. It quickly falls to the ground, and from it, some monsters emerge. The elf is surprised by this. At that moment, the souls of the dead creatures exit their bodies. They are quickly captured because all of them will be sent directly to the underworld. The other elf asks what she is waiting for, saying they should return home. Observing all of this, the protagonist now remarks that the underworld and the cycle of reincarnation seem to be functioning well. Kin is surprised, realizing that all of this is due to her master's actions. She thinks it's time to move on to his next destination, which is the tree before him, the elven capital. The scene then cuts to the city of the elves. Another elf announces that all the slaves will be responsible for cleaning the city from that moment on. They hand out brooms to the slaves. Looking up, a girl observes something, thinking that she's finally home. Shortly after, a carriage passes by her side. The girl watches the person inside. At that moment, someone begins to exit the carriage. The protagonist, alongside Kin, appears and remarks that there are elves everywhere. He suggests they disguise their ears to blend into the city. Meanwhile, a man walks by, asking his servant how many minerals those inferior races mine each day. An elf seems to be begging for money to eat. Dao comments that he has nothing against the nobles, but there is a vast gap between the rich and the poor, and it's truly depressing. At that moment, the spirit appears, saying that the celestial Dao could easily put an end to it. However, the boy asks him to stop talking nonsense. He explains that to achieve equality, the oppressed need to resist on their own. A third-party intervention would only turn them into victims of another author. The spirit notes that the boy is increasingly becoming the celestial Dao. The protagonist says he will take that as a compliment. He observes the state of the world tree and asks if it has any connection with the elves. Kin, in turn, asks if her master wishes to meet the elven goddess. The boy replies that he does. Kin then suggests that she could set the world tree on fire, and at that moment, the woman would definitely appear. However, Dao asks her to wait, saying he only wishes to speak with her, so there's no need for fights. Kin mourns that the woman was a rebel during the second cycle. Therefore, there's nothing to discuss. But the young man responds that's precisely why it's even more important to talk to her, because he needs to understand what those rebels think about all of this. He mentions that those who make more friends will have fewer enemies. For this reason, they should gather as many allies as possible. At that moment, a commotion arises as a girl rides a runaway carriage, rushing towards the protagonist and Kin while shouting for them to move. It's the elven princess, warning that she won't take responsibility if they get hurt. The carriage passes by the protagonist without harm. The system informs him that she is the Golden Princess Kerm, a mid-stage third-order elf. The protagonist questions whether this is how nobles teach their children, believing their behavior should be corrected. Just then, a blonde-haired elf passes by, while the princess nearly runs over an elderly man. The elf quickly intervenes and saves him, asking if he's okay. Watching this, the girl wonders why the elves have changed so much. The old man thanks the elf for her help, and the protagonist steps forward, remarking on her rare kindness in this feudal society. The elf asks who the boy is, and he replies that he's just a curious person. He asks the old man if the elven princess has always been this rude, to which the elderly man responds that it's not just the princess, nobles act this way, with their fates determined at birth. The golden and moon elves are nobility, while the others are craftsmen, and some are even slaves. The elf disagrees, stating that status should not be determined by birth, questioning why he thinks that way. The old man explains it's due to lifespan. Grey elves live only 1,000 years, while golden elves live over 5,000 years. The protagonist observes that elves live a long time, which the system confirms, but also notes that they have a low fertility rate, as stronger beings are less likely to have children. The protagonist asks if they can have children, and the system replies that it depends. The boy then asks if he wants a child or if he wants others to have one. Kin excitedly asks if her master wants a child, offering to help. The old man, seeing the youthful energy, thanks the elf and says he will be on his way. The elf comments that her race shouldn't be like this, and responds that the elves now are very different from those during her reign, asking if he's correct. The girl reveals that she is the ancient goddess and mother of the elves. At that moment, the elf activates her power, questioning who the boy really is. The protagonist asks if she doesn't recognize the Celestialda. The elf responds that it's impossible, as she has seen the Celestialda before, and he was completely different from him. The boy realizes he needs to explain differently and snaps his fingers, creating a massive barrier around the city. The elf is surprised, realizing her power is being blocked. De grabs her, asking if she believes him now. The elf, confused, wonders when he got so close. She pulls away, saying she must make the first move. She begins casting a spell, but Kin intervenes, questioning how she dares be rude to her master, suggesting she desires his death. The elf reflects that her soul has only recently recovered and that her strength barely reaches the peak of the 6th layer, so she needs to escape. She starts casting a teleportation spell but disappears in vain, as the spell fails against the barrier. She falls to the ground, thinking it's impossible that even teleportation doesn't work against the barrier. At that moment, Kin immobilizes the elf, stating that she has caught her. Kin then releases her at Da's request. The young man asks again if the elf now believes he is the Celestialda. The elf remains hesitant, and reassures her not to be nervous, as he only wants to ask a few questions. The elf realizes that even Kin wouldn't be able to escape now, and the only way to survive is to cooperate. She agrees to answer his questions. The first question Da asks is what the rebels' plan is. The elf responds that she has no idea. Although she was part of the rebels in the second cycle, she doesn't know their plans for the third era. An elven god is now considered a moderate force among the rebels, so it's normal that she wouldn't have that information. For his second question, Da asks why she hates the heavens. The elf explains that in the first great cycle, she was a goddess born from the world tree, and together they protected the birth and growth of the elves. Those prosperous and happy times remain vivid in her memory. However, at the end of the first cycle, she witnessed a catastrophe and barely survived, while the world tree was reduced to a mere seed. She asks if Da still wonders why she hates the heavens, stating that the question doesn't even make sense. Da replies that the destruction caused by the former celestial Tao led to deep hatred. For his final question, Da asks what the elf considers the most important thing. The elf, deep in thought, replies that she only wishes to survive and protect her people forever. Da then asks if she's truly willing to do that. The elf questions what he means, and Da responds that actions speak louder than words, so she should see the truth with her own eyes. Seconds later, the two are teleported, and the scene cuts to the elven forest's mine. Da explains that this is a place where the elves create wealth through practices like slavery, which has become normal, and many suffer as a result. The elf is enraged, wondering how they could treat her people like that. De is disappointed, noting that he was only able to stop human trafficking, but pure slavery could not be addressed by him. Hearing this, the elf realizes that the black figures were Da's doing. She asks why he doesn't stop pure slavery too, but De responds that she has misunderstood. Slavery isn't only about human trafficking, prisoners of war and criminals can also be enslaved. He asks if she also wants to save those people. The elf, reflecting, acknowledges that while she despises human trafficking, the continued killing and abuse are wrong. The boy asks the elf not to place the responsibility on him. The elf expresses confusion, asking why De has the power to change the world but refuses to save these people. De then questions her, asking what the elves did when the celestial De tried to change the world. He asks her to explain why the earth realm became barren, and why the heavens and world possess the most resources. The elf says the only one with a better life is the celestial. De asks if that's why they needed his power, suggesting that her people also sought a better life by oppressing their own kind. The elf denies it, explaining that De wants to absorb the power of all beings to become stronger, so they had to resist. De explains that his power comes from all living things, so the death of those beings would weaken his strength. He questions why the former celestial De chose to destroy all beings instead of just eliminating the most powerful. Confused, the elf admits she doesn't know how to answer. De tells her that even if she doesn't know everything, she should recognize what she holds in her hands. Seeing what's in front of her, the elf is surprised. De explains that it's her, specifically, right after she woke up during the second cycle. At that time, she drained all the spring aura, which was meant to revive the world tree and give it its vitality. De asks if she knew that this source of life brought the entire continent back to life. He explains that many widows would have been born if she hadn't taken it. The girl collapses, admitting that she knew all of that, but she still wanted to live. If the celestial De hadn't destroyed all beings, she wouldn't have needed to take the source. De then asks why the former celestial De chose to destroy her when she stole the opportunity given to all by the heavens. He explains that some people suffer because of their own greed, and now she faces the same problem as the celestial De. He asks what her response would be if she faced the fallen elves. At that moment, an elf sends an alert, announcing that the rebel dark elves are invading. But before he can finish, the man is killed. Another man introduces himself as Shaddle, leader of the Dark Elves' resistance. He declares that he's there to free them, so they should raise their weapons. He then hands weapons to the elves, who, with threatening looks, begin to observe their kin who had enslaved them. They start to fight those who had oppressed them. The goddess standing with the protagonist silently watches everything, tears streaming down her face. She seems unable to believe what is happening and says that this isn't how things were supposed to unfold. The protagonist asks what she would do if she could stop it all. He explains that unless the root of the problem is addressed, such events will continue. She blames it all on the protagonist, stating that if she still had her power, this wouldn't have occurred. Kin asks if the rebel still hasn't learned her lesson. The protagonist says that she truly hasn't understood. In the second cycle, the elves were already divided into upper and lower classes. The golden elves, who were close to Earth, were considered nobles, while the dark elves were isolated and treated as inferior beings. It was because the celestial De witnessed all this suffering that he decided to destroy everything. As the mother goddess of the elves, she failed to protect her people. Hearing this, she finally understands and admits she wasn't a qualified mother goddess. The protagonist tells her to stop crying, explaining that when faced with a problem, one should find a solution. She replies that she is too weak and has no power to act. De asks if she didn't resist when she was weak, questioning where that courage was when she opposed the heavens. If she had shown even half of it, the elves might have changed their perspective. She falls silent and says that now she knows what she must do. De asks what her plan is. She responds that she wants to go to the Dark Elf Resistance Fortress and find out what their demands are. De says she knows she must always listen to the people, and for that reason, he will reward her by giving her a ride there. He opens a portal and tells them to go immediately. Kin asks why the protagonist is helping, and the boy replies that having a friend is better than an enemy. Watching the situation unfold, the elf realizes she knows nothing about the celestial De. They step through the portal, and the scene shifts to the fortress of the Dark Elf Resistance. The elf and the protagonist appear, and Dao announces that he has stopped hiding her presence so the elves can see her. The girl approaches the cave entrance, and the elves begin preparing. Soon, they shoot arrows at her, but Dao says that she is the mother goddess of the elves, and arrows won't harm her. The elf responds that although she hasn't fully recovered, she's not weak enough to be defeated by mere arrows. Instantly, she deflects the attacks, and the group of elves is surprised to realize that the magic she used could only be performed by a 5th-rank mage. Another elf charges at her, declaring that regardless of her origin, the golden elves must die. The elf starts casting a spell, and she restrains all the elves nearby. The protagonist observes and notes that even in the initial stages of the Fourth Order, the Dark Elves' power is considerable, a strength rare among human nations. Sensing an unusual presence, the elf remarks that someone is approaching. A creature appears, saying that those elves are no match for her, for she is the very mother goddess of the elves. The elf, recognizing the creature, is surprised. She realizes that it is the Dark Elves' goddess. On the other hand, is thoughtful and uses a spell to analyze the creature's stats. He wonders why she is at the fifth layer and recalls that the current elven goddess was at least at the pinnacle of the celestial layer. The difference between them isn't great. The spirit explains that there are two types of gods, natural gods and gods of faith. Natural gods, born from the will of the heavens, are often born with immense power, whereas gods of faith derive their strength from the beliefs of others. If their followers are few, their power weakens or disappears. De concludes that, given this, the current situation of the Dark Elves isn't good. The scene shifts to the creature saying she is glad the elf isn't dead. She draws her weapon and charges at the elf, declaring that she will take great pleasure in defeating her. The elf asks what she means, explaining that she is there to help the Dark Elves. The Dark Elf goddess questions if her memory is damaged, reminding her that the Dark Elves suffered under her rule, and now things are even worse. She declares that only by defeating her and stripping her of her divinity can the Dark Elves be saved. De intervenes, asking if they can avoid involving him in elven affairs. He snaps his fingers, freezing all the elves. The Dark Elf goddess is shocked, asking why everyone has stopped moving. De assures her not to worry, explaining that he merely stopped time. However, the girl still doesn't believe it, insisting that it's impossible for anyone to stop time. De responds that ordinary people can't do it, but for the Celestial Da, it's nothing special. The creature is astonished, recalling that the Celestial Da was the one who destroyed the world in the first and second cycles. She asks if the boy is truly the Celestial Da, and he confirms it. Observing the situation, the creature notes that even the Mother Goddess doesn't deny his claim. She kneels and apologizes for her rudeness, hoping the Celestial Da can forgive her. The boy says it's fine, he was just passing by to watch the show. However, the elves still need to ask their goddess about these matters. The Dark Elf goddess admits that she is neither a qualified goddess nor a competent creator. She says that self-blame won't save the Dark Elves. What they need right now is power and revenge. The elf goddess acknowledges that she understands their feelings. Her current state is similar to when she fought against the heavens. Back then, she only thought about resisting oppression and would do whatever it took for revenge. When she created the elven race, she gave them corresponding characteristics and symbols. The golden elves are the sun and light, the moon elves represent the moon and nights, and the forest elves symbolize trees. The dark elves are shadows and spiders. She created this cycle and hoped all elves could live in peace, abandoning their hatred. The dark elf goddess, irritated, asks if she expects her to explain this to the dark elves who were oppressed and murdered by the golden elves. She insists that only by spilling blood can they console the families of the dark elves who have lost loved ones. Therefore, if the elf goddess truly wants to help the dark elves, she must join her in killing the elf king and all the golden elves who committed evil. The elf goddess responds that she cannot do that because both the dark elves and golden elves are her children, and she cannot bear to lose any of them. Frustrated, the dark elf goddess questions why she is saying such nonsense, arguing that if that were true, she should be supporting the golden elves. At that moment, the protagonist intervenes, asking what she plans to do once the resistance succeeds. The girl replies that she would make the golden elves suffer for everything they had done. De asks if it isn't the dark elves who hate the idea of ruling. The woman insists that she is not like the selfish golden elves and only wants the dark elves to live in peace. Dao tells her that if she truly thinks differently from the golden elves, she should not act like them. It's a matter of morality. If she wants to fight the golden elves for power, she shouldn't claim that the dark elves are suffering. If she truly seeks justice, she must not repeat the actions of the golden elves. Hearing his words, she falls silent. She says that the golden elves have done terrible things to her clan and must be punished for everything. Dao explains that there is always a price to pay for wrongdoing, but the price isn't to enslave the golden elves for generations. At that moment, another creature sighs, saying it now understands the situation. It says it won't do anything as long as the dark elves can live a normal life. De feels content that the matter has been resolved. The elf apologizes, saying the issue was supposed to be internal but ended up involving him. De replies that it's no trouble, as this encounter with the elves has given him some ideas. He tells her that while the elves are her responsibility, all races across the three worlds fall under the Celestial Da's concern. He then asks how she plans to resolve the situation. She answers that she already understands everything and needs to speak with the current elven emperor. If they can't reach an agreement, she will use force. De warns that force doesn't resolve problems, only deals with enemies. The elf replies that if they can't talk, the Golden Elves and their supporters will be her enemies. De says that she's already figured out how to handle things and will watch the outcome unfold. They begin to leave for the elven palace. At that moment, the scene shifts to the palace. A cup shatters as one elf scolds another for not adding less sugar, explaining that she's trying to lose weight. The elf then asks if the girl has prepared the afternoon tea. The maid pleads for forgiveness, but her mistress questions if she believes everything can be fixed by just apologizing. Another elf watches the scene from above, wondering how her people could treat each other this way. De asks if she can't stand seeing this and jokes that she might explode if he shows her more. He directs her attention to another part of the building, where an elf is escorting two girls, urging them to hurry. A butler knocks on a door and announces the arrival of new servants. The man inside compliments the butler, noting that something might happen today. The elf watching all of this remains silent. De asks how she feels. The elf responds that this is the current reality of the elves, so there's no need to negotiate with the royalty. She begins casting a spell, causing the giant tree to glow. Immediately, the ground trembles, and people kneel, fearing the goddess is angry. The earthquake stops, but giant monsters start appearing. A voice calls out to them, summoning a massive dragon. The dragon roars as the scene shifts to the celestial realm of the elven gods. A man notices the disturbance and wonders why the world tree has suddenly become enraged. He suspects someone has returned and orders his servants to investigate. If they find it is their enemy, they are to destroy it immediately. The servants comply and follow orders. The scene shifts to the giant monster, watching the clouds. It realizes something important is happening and calls one of its servants, instructing them to gather the hidden dark elves because a battle of gods is about to begin. Inside the palace, chaos erupts as the elven goddess watches. The man from earlier appears, demanding to know who she is and why she has enraged the world tree. The elf replies that he doesn't need to know who she is. She simply wants to end the elven nobility and make them pay for oppressing their own kind. The man laughs, saying she hasn't understood something important. Even with the Dark Elves' help and the World Tree, she won't defeat the reign of the Golden Elves. He explains that the god of the Golden Elves is the current elven god and one of the western gods of the heavens. The girl responds, asking if that's all he has to say, because if so, there is nothing left to discuss. The man asks if she thinks she can escape. He signals his fingers, and a group of archers prepares to attack. The mages accompanying the girls appear ready for this. De observes that all of them are specialists above the 5th layer and advises caution. The elf asks why he said they wanted to unite the elves when even the elves themselves don't listen to her. De tells her not to ask him, reminding her that when she rebelled against the heavens, she asked the same question. The man asks if those will be her last words and orders his subordinates to defeat them. The elf replies that this is the war he has chosen and, with tears in her eyes, asks not to be blamed for what will happen next. At that moment, a giant monster appears with a menacing gaze, watching the elves. The monsters begin attacking the city. The man orders the activation of the protection spell. The monster strikes the barrier, but behind it, a dragon unleashes its attack on the barrier, successfully shattering it. Panicked, the elf realizes that the protection spell is gone, and the city's defenses have been breached. Seeing the barrier crumble, the monsters advance. Soldiers begin to flee, but it is futile. The general orders his troops to maintain their formation and fight back. Meanwhile, the elven god observes from above, surprised to see ancient monsters and the celestial dragon involved. Still, he believes they will emerge victorious in the end. The elf asks what he means, and the man instructs her to look up. A beam of light pierces the sky. 3 angels descend, and one introduces herself as Kareen, the angel queen of the elven gods, sent by the current elven god to suppress the rebels. De notices they have 4 pairs of wings and remarks that they've indeed sent an elven angel queen. He concludes that their intent is to destroy the entire world tree. The elf responds that she can't allow that to happen. De warns that there may be problems if they enter the human world without suppressing their power. At that moment, a lightning bolt strikes, heading toward the angel. She quickly perceives it and deflects the strike with her sword. De comments that the celestial punishment for specialists entering the human world doesn't seem strong enough. He summons the system and declares his intention to change the rule for celestial punishment in the human world. He specifies that withstanding or breaking celestial punishment will not count as passing the trial. Instead, it will trigger a new celestial punishment, which will be stronger than the previous one. The cycle continues until the individual is destroyed. Satisfied, denotes that he now has time until the incense stick burns before a level 10 Emperor lightning strike hits. The elf remarks that she thought De would eliminate the girl immediately. De replies that it wasn't easy for her to descend, so he wants to treat her as a gift for the elf goddess and let her have some fun. At that moment, the clouds glow again as numerous lightning bolts descend from the sky. Katarina wonders if she has already triggered the lightning. Deciding to end the battle quickly, a voice calls out to her. The dragon asks if she really wants to become an enemy of the world tree. The elf goddess apologizes, stating that she is under the command of the elven god. The dragon replies that the elven god has gained attention and now believes he is truly a god. Katarina demands that he stop insulting her god, commanding her forces to protect the elven palace while she handles the world tree herself. Observing this, the dragon comments on her arrogance, questioning if she thinks he can be defeated just because he's been suppressed. Katarina responds that, even with her full power, she would not fear facing the elven god. The dragon charges at her, eager to test her strength, but the elf goddess steps in, wanting to handle the situation herself. Upon recognizing her goddess, the dragon is surprised and realizes she is still alive. The elf replies that she had been killed before, but seeing the state of the elves now, she cannot rest. She begins an incantation, asking the world tree for its strength, and at that moment, the tree begins to glow. From it, a spirit emerges, and Kin, witnessing this, is shocked as the tree produces 6 great fruits. Meanwhile, De watches from above, irritated. He questions how these could be called fruits, as they are clearly mystical realms. He notes that if an elven goddess possesses fruits from the 6 mystical realms, it would have taken significant resources from those in the reverse celestial king layer. The spirit asks De if he wants to eliminate her, but De replies not to rush, as they have remained hidden for many years, and it no longer matters. The spirits head in different directions, entering the elf goddess's body. A stronger elf declares that she wants to see what the elf goddess is truly made of. Katarina asks the elf who she is, and at that moment, Malucha begins casting a spell, declaring herself as the elven goddess. The angel still doubts her, asking who the other lord is. Lucia replies that he is merely a rebel, but the angel charges at the goddess. The goddess begins her incantation, and Katarina's attack hits her, though she has already erected a protective barrier. Katarina, astonished, questions how such divine power can exist in the human realm. Lucia responds that the power hidden within the human realm far exceeds Katarina's imagination. Looking back, she commands the dragon to assist the dark elves in overthrowing the golden elves. The dragon obeys and roars, causing all the monsters to charge toward the palace. Soon after, Mairer calls out, questioning why the dragon is betraying the elves. The dragon replies that his loyalty was never to the elf king. Mairer declares that he will not show leniency to the dragon. At that moment, another elf appears, telling Mir to worry about himself instead. An attack strikes Mir, who barely manages to defend himself. The elf comments on the impressive quality of the golden elf's armor. Mairer asks if the young man is with the rebels, and the young man confirms he has always been one of them. Mir, enraged, reacts to this revelation. The scene then shifts to another boy watching the battle from above, observing a yellow globe. He comments that the dragon and the monsters have completely turned against them, and notes that the Third Legion has been thrown into disarray by the monsters from his own legion. Meanwhile, the Fourth and Fifth Legions, stationed outside the city, are attacked by wild beasts. Concerned, the girl wonders what she should do. The scene cuts to a monster raising its weapon, declaring that the crusade against the Elven Emperor has officially begun. The Elven God, observing everything, is furious, calling them an inferior race. At that moment, the dragon launches an attack toward the Elven God, but the elf goddess manages to defend it. The dragon warns that his army can no longer protect him and states that one day, the Elven God will be killed. The Elven God retorts, asking if the dragon realizes the situation, pointing out that it's 3 against 1, and the dragon has no chance of winning. The elf goddess behind the Elven God takes the hit, and it's revealed that Kin is also attacking the dragon. The Elven God declares that it is now 2 against 2. The scene shifts to another, where an elf charges at Lucia and attacks, even managing to shatter Lucia's barrier. The elf goddess quickly casts another barrier. The assault continues as the elf tries to break through again. Lucia remarks that even a celestial-level martial artist wouldn't be able to defeat her in 3 moves. She begins casting a spell, telling the girl to surrender, as she cannot defeat her before the celestial punishment is delivered. Lucia then launches a series of attacks at the elf. The elf draws her sword again, questioning why Lucia wishes to destroy the peace they've attained. Lucia responds that she knows this peace was carefully achieved, but it was built on the bodies of others to gain prosperity, and everything about it is wrong. She prepares a massive attack, and the elves watching believe a meteor is falling, assuming they are doomed. At that moment, the elf tries to flee, believing the meteor won't harm the Elf King. She charges toward the meteor, colliding with it, causing it to shatter upon impact, and the girl falls unconscious. Lucia approaches the fallen girl, remarking that she is a gentle child, but that gentleness won't change the elven race. The girl begins to rise, asserting that the elven race doesn't need to change. She grabs Lucia, who, confused, asks what she's trying to do, as this action cannot harm her. The girl replies that it is enough. At that moment, the sky begins to glow again. The elf declares that while she cannot kill, she can at least inflict some damage, and for that reason, they should meet their end together. A massive bolt of lightning falls from the sky, heading toward the two. However, at that moment, Da snaps his fingers, and the attack dissipates. Both are stunned as the lightning vanishes. The protagonist remarks that using celestial punishment maliciously to harm others is like putting the cart before the horse. He summons the system, stating that the rules need adjustments. From now on, celestial punishments will only harm the person who triggers them and won't affect anyone else. The system confirms that the rules have been updated. As Da begins to leave, he tells them to continue their fight but to mind him. The girl watching the protagonist wonders what kind of person he is, thinking that anyone who can stop lightning so effortlessly must be truly powerful. At that moment, Lucia looks up at the sky, and everyone around her is shocked. It's revealed that the Elf King has been killed, and as a result, all the soldiers lose hope, quickly dropping their weapons and fleeing. FIA says that their king has been executed and asks if they still wish to continue resisting. In response, the girl smiles and asks if the rebels still haven't realized the gravity of the situation. At that moment, an immense light crosses the sky, and the girl says they will feel the fury of her god. Lucia observes, saying he is arriving. Then the god appears, declaring they dared to kill even his physical reincarnation and that the dragon shouldn't think they wouldn't kill just because she was the daughter of the dragon god. The dragon is astonished, saying she didn't expect him to visit the human realm personally. Looking to the side, the god is surprised to see that Lucia has truly returned to life. Drawing his sword, he says he can't spare them again. His soldiers resume the battle, now more hopeful because the elven god will act personally. Lucia thinks he is of celestial level, and even with the help of the world tree, there's no chance of winning with her current power. Delivering an attack, the elf says that the girl has overstayed her welcome and should die immediately. Lucia invokes her barrier, but it's easily shattered. None of that had been enough, however, as to intervene stylishly, asking if the gods of the celestial realm really treat the rules of the human realm like trash. Furious, he says that breaking the wall of the human realm directly was too much. The elf retorts that the protagonist is just trash from the human realm and shouldn't think he can talk to the god just because he blocked one attack. At that moment, Da falls silent, and in seconds, he appears in front of the god, preparing his attack and telling him to return immediately to the celestial realm. The punch hits the elf, sending him flying. The scene then cuts to the celestial realm, to the palace of the elven gods. A sudden force crashes into the space, revealing the elf god who has broken through the wall and is now severely wounded. His servants, noticing his condition, ask if their lord is okay. Irritated, the god wonders if humans really dared to treat him in such a way, and he declares that the gods will exterminate them. The scene shifts to the protagonist, seemingly relieved, stating that the next realm still exists, and breaking the world wall was dangerous. Kin suggests they should wipe out the city of the elven gods, and she's ready to carry out that task, but the protagonist tells her to remain silent. Meanwhile, another elf watches, stunned, wondering how that being could have defeated her god with a single blow, and she asks who he is. Lucius replies, confirming that the being is indeed the heavenly Da. The girl falls to her knees, asking if that meant it was really the heavenly Da. Lucius confirms this, and the girl falls silent, realizing her failure. The scene shifts to the Dark Elves, who are pleased to have won the battle, though the Golden Elves remain in disbelief. A man then suggests they should kill all the Golden Elves to avenge their comrades, but Mer stops him, saying their objective, killing the Elf King, is accomplished. She questions why they should massacre more, to which the man argues that it's the same treatment the Golden Elves gave the Dark Elves, and thus they are justified in doing the same. His queen intervenes, urging him to calm down, explaining that continuing the bloodshed would only increase the number of victims. She warns that if he persists, they cannot ignore his actions. Looking up, he notices an elf who announces herself as Lucia, the World Tree, returned after a long journey. She begins casting a spell, and Mer recognizes the light as the one that heals the wounds of the elves. Lucia states that since the Elf King has died, it's time to put aside old grudges and move forward together. Dragon slayers should not become evil dragons, and all elves should cooperate to rebuild their home. Observing, denotes that it seems like the girl is echoing what he had said earlier. The system comments that this world has no patents. Soon, all the elves drop their weapons and kneel. The queen declares she is willing to follow the elven goddess, and the golden elves kneel, ready to listen to the goddess's words. Lucia smiles, content with the progress. Later, the protagonist congratulates Lucia, stating she did well in gaining some divine stature. However, Lucia responds that though things seem calm, the deeper issues among the elves are far from resolved. There are already divisions forming, and while her presence might maintain peace superficially, without addressing the root causes, conflict between races will continue. De agrees, impressed with her progress, and says that in the third cycle, the Heavenly De gave her the chance to restart and unite the elven race. This time, she must not fail. Lucia asks how they can resolve the situation, and she grabs Da's arm, stating she will pay any price as long as he helps her people and eliminates the social divisions. Kin, watching, grows furious and asks what the goddess is doing. Da tells Kin to step back and listen, explaining that the elves are facing two main issues: the conflicts between races and the inequality of wealth. The elven race needs to change in 4 areas: food, clothing, housing, and education. To address these, Da suggests creating an elven community. When Lucia asks what that means, Da explains that in a community, everyone is equal, and elves will perform the tasks they are best at, with the community providing food and shelter. He has already calculated that the elves can produce enough food to be self-sufficient. Lucia mentions that lower-class elves suffer from a lack of food because higher-class elves sell their surplus to humans in exchange for luxury goods. Da affirms that in the future, all the elves' resources must be distributed equally to make the community work. Lucia acknowledges that food and clothing are easier to solve, but housing will require money. Da assures her they have plenty of money, and they see Catherine approaching, escorted by a knight. Da tells Lucia that now is the time to deal with the former elven nobles. Lucia says the properties of the golden and silver elves will be seized and given to the community after an inspection. The guards eagerly start confiscating everything, much to the irritation of Catherine, who orders them to stop. A man appears behind her, placing a knife to her neck and saying that one day, she would pay for oppressing others. The soldiers fall silent, realizing they've been cornered. Da informs them that they have all lost their high-status privileges and will now work alongside elves from other races. He asks the guard if he agrees, and the guard says yes. Catherine, enraged, insists that the golden and silver elves were born to rule, and the group's victory is only temporary. Da asks what proof she has that they were destined to rule. Catherine replies that they were born nobles. Lucia, frustrated, uses magic to bind a plant around Catherine's neck, warning her that this is the last time she will tolerate her disrespect. She compares the differences between the elf races to roots, trunks, branches, and fruits, each different, yet part of the same organism. She declares that if the different elf races want to prove themselves special, they will have a chance under her rule. She then throws a hoe at Catherine, telling her to use her hands to create something valuable to prove herself. Catherine asks if it's a joke, as she is a noble among elves, but Miara takes the hoe without resistance. Catherine asks if Miara really plans to do manual labor like the dark elves. The knight responds that working alongside the victors is a gift, and there was never a need to place elves in different classes, it was a mistake made by the Lord God. Catherine calls him a traitor, and remarks that it seems there are reasonable elves after all. Lucia, in turn, says she believes most elves are good, like Miara. Da comments that Lucia's new rule could end the elven tribes, but Lucia replies she welcomes anyone who will monitor her rule. Catherine will now work alongside others to observe her, but Catherine laughs, claiming the girl's rule will soon crumble. Lucia comments that she didn't expect the silver elves to be more stubborn than the golden elves. Da explains that the silver elves have closer ties to the ancient elven god. Lucia says the housing problem remains unresolved, as it cannot be built quickly. The protagonist laughs, calling the girl foolish. She asks what he's referring to, and the boy raises his arms, saying he'll teach her something. The elf then uses her powers to make a tree grow, its branches forming a house. The goddess is impressed, commenting that she didn't know such a thing existed and saying she admires Da more and more. The boy smiles, responding that she's limited by her rigid thinking. Lucia then says she knows what to do first, and she uses her powers again to create a massive building, claiming it's a collection of all the magic she knows, transformed into books. The protagonist agrees, stating that magic is crucial for the elves, but basic education is also necessary. The goddess announces that the books in the library are community property, free of charge, but warns that the golden and silver elves shouldn't celebrate just yet. They will have to work harder than the others to pay off their past mistakes. Mahir offers to lead the Golden Elves in making amends. Lukia turns to the protagonist, asking if he thinks the current situation is acceptable. The girl explains that she fears after the initial enthusiasm fades, they will neglect their duties and fall back into the same state. De says he has a solution, suggesting she create a point system where elves earn points for completing tasks. Any remaining value produced would count toward their points, and then a points market could be established with legal prices, allowing the needy to buy what they need. However, these points could only be used by individuals and not traded to prevent resale. In gratitude, the goddess says she'll give him a gift, and the protagonist asks what it is. Lukia explains that it's information about a person from the reverse celestial layer. The next day, the goddess and the protagonist visit the Adventurers Association. De observes the place and asks if the person from the celestial layer is here, to which the elf replies that no one of that rank is present, but there is someone with ties to the association. Before that, she needs the boy to do something for her. The girl knocks on a door, and the person inside asks her to enter. Luran, the head of the Elven Forest Department, asks what business the goddess has with the Adventurers Association. Lukia places some papers on her desk, saying she needs information about the safety of the elves listed there. Luran notes that it's a list of elven slaves who have been sold. Lukia remarks that the last elf king sold others for personal gain, and she won't allow such behavior to continue. The department head sips her tea and says there's nothing she can do about it. The elf goddess then takes out her weapon, offering it as payment. Luran is surprised by this offer. The woman says that she will receive updates about each person in a month, but she can't guarantee they'll still be alive. Lukia replies that she doesn't need confirmation of their survival, just the accuracy of the information. After reaching an agreement, De asks if she's ready to discuss the person from the reverse celestial layer. The goddess points to a piece of paper on the wall and explains that the person in question is featured on the poster. It mentions the discovery of ancient relics deep within the 10,000 mountains, with the Adventurers Association offering high prices for any found relics. The pair then head to the location, where De observes the relic door and notes the markings are half angel and half demon. Kin comments that the symbol looks like that of the god of good and evil and Ong from the west, but using Eastern martial arts techniques. De asks how she was as a person during the second cycle. Kin responds that she was unremarkable but was the second disciple of the great celestial demon mother. The magic sphere comments that the celestial demon mother might have been significant in the second cycle, but in front of De, she'd be no more than an insect. The protagonist says those cultivators don't understand the cultivation system set by the previous celestial Tao, which never limited them but aimed to protect them from the chaos outside their realm. The common realm was trusted by the previous celestial Tao to let cultivators explore the chaos, but they misused it for their own cultivation. De believes cultivators shouldn't have stopped in the small realm but should have conquered the sea of chaos, creating 3,000 realms. The sphere responds that while the boy's thinking is good, not everyone will act as he wishes. Soon after, De notices someone arriving on a dragon. It's Anru, who apologizes for being late. The man asks who the protagonist is, and De replies they shouldn't worry, as he's just an adventurer looking for relics. De casually asks a question, saying it's nothing personal, just small talk. Anru responds that it takes hard work and a bit of luck, along with exercising the body and accumulating knowledge. De then asks what cultivation qualification the soldier would like to receive, but the man doesn't understand. The boy gives an example, explaining that people receive attributes like earth, fire, wind, and water or partners, weapons, or pets upon birth. Anru asks if this is how animals are domesticated, and De explains that at 6 years old, people awaken a magical weapon or beast to enhance their strength through cultivation. The knight says he'd like to see that, and maybe everyone is suited for fighting, like dragons. De responds that if people use this method and awaken different abilities, there will be differences in power, and a new class division will form, much like it is now. Anru believes that if the methods are correct, everyone has a chance to become powerful, as hard work is essential. De finds it curious that the young man values the cultivation method more than qualifications. The man asks why De is asking this, and De responds that the goddess is stronger, so he should ask her, as she has a higher reference value. De then turns to talk to the young man's companion, assuring her that he means no harm. The sphere comments that if he had malicious intent, they would all be dead by now. The girl introduces herself as Ing and asks if De needs anything. The protagonist asks what she desires, and she explains that as a 4th-rank cultivator, she has no spiritual roots and can't progress beyond the 5th rank, meaning she won't ascend to the immortal realm. The sphere explains that she's referring to wisdom roots, and for a 4th-rank cultivator, she has only 60 years to reach the meta-infant stage. Denotes that the young woman hasn't awakened her efforts yet. Ing says the goal of cultivation is to go against the heavens, and if she doesn't reach the immortal realm, her cultivation will turn to dust. De gets irritated and asks who said cultivation is against the heavens. Ing replies that it was her master, stating that cultivation is about taking the key to heaven and earth to grow stronger, which is why heavenly punishments exist.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more manhwa recaps every week. Hit that bell icon so you never miss the latest chapters and stories from your favorite manhwa series.